The sound still haunts me. The clatter of the plate hitting the trash, the slow drip of sauce sliding down porcelain, and my daughter's cold voice saying, "I told you, Mom, I'm not eating this." It wasn't just dinner she threw away that night. It was me. I had spent hours in that kitchen, hands aching, back stiff, trying to make her favorite roast chicken, the one her father used to love. I wanted to see her smile again, just once, like when she was little. But when she stood there, phone in hand, rolling her eyes like I was a burden, something inside me cracked. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at the food sliding into the trash and realized that love, the kind I'd carried in silence for years, had turned into something she couldn't even taste. That night, I didn't lose my appetite. I lost my place in her world. And I didn't know it yet, but the woman who walked away from that kitchen would never be the same again. Hi, my name is Linda Hayes. I'm 58 years old, and I used to believe that being a good mother meant never saying no. I live in a quiet house in Portland, Oregon, though lately, silence feels louder than any city noise ever could. I lost my husband 8 years ago. He was the calm in every storm, the man who reminded me that love doesn't always need words. And when he passed, I poured every bit of that love into one person, our daughter, Samantha. She was my reason to wake up, my proof that something beautiful could still grow from grief. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that giving too much can teach people to take too easily. When she bought her first home, she asked me to move in. "Just until I get settled, Mom." So, I did. I cooked, I cleaned, I paid half the bills without being asked, and for a while I believed we were still a family. But love slowly changed shape in that house. It became one-sided, invisible, and somewhere between her busy mornings and my lonely dinners, I realized I had become useful, not loved. That's who I am, a mother who gave everything, and a woman who's finally learning what it costs to forget herself. When I first moved into Samantha's home, I thought love had called me there. She hugged me at the door, said, "It'll be nice having you around, Mom." And for a while, it really was. I'd make her breakfast before work, coffee with vanilla creamer, toast just the way she liked. She'd smile, kiss my cheek, and say, "You spoil me." Those words used to mean everything. But slowly, something shifted. Her smiles grew shorter, her tone colder. She started sighing when I asked simple questions. Where she was going, if she'd eat dinner at home. It was like every word I spoke carried weight she didn't want to lift. Then one morning, as I folded her laundry, she looked at me and said, "You don't have to do that, Mom. You're not my maid." I froze. Not because of what she said, but because of how easy it was for her to say it. The same hands that once tied her shoelaces were now in her way. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt, because that's what mothers do. We bleed quietly, hoping love notices. But love didn't notice that day. And for the first time, I began to see that maybe it never would again. It was a Thursday evening, quiet, gray, and heavy with rain. I had spent the whole afternoon cooking her favorite meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and buttered corn. The kind of dinner that once made her giggle as a child, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter, stealing bites before it was done. The table was set, candles lit, napkins folded, everything perfect. I even wore the blue cardigan her father used to love, because I wanted, just for one night, to feel like a mother again, not an obligation. When Samantha came home, she barely looked at me. Her phone in one hand, keys in the other, her voice flat.
Mom, I told you I'm on a diet. I smiled softly. Just one bite, sweetheart. It's your favorite. That's when she sighed loud, annoyed, and before I could move, she scraped the food into the trash. The slid chicken slid down the plate, the sound echoing like a door slamming shut. "You never listen," she muttered. And then she walked away. The room went still. The candles flickered once and went out. The smell of roasted garlic and butter hung in the air like a ghost. I didn't cry. I just stared at the empty plate and realized she hadn't thrown away dinner. She had thrown away us.
The house had never felt so quiet. Even the rain outside seemed to hush itself, as if the world understood that something sacred had just broken. The dinner table sat untouched, one plate empty, one still full, a candle flickering low between them, its flame bent and swayed, casting long shadows on the walls that once held laughter. I sat there for hours. No tears, no words, just that hollow, stretching silence that comes when your heart finally gives up trying to explain itself. Her footsteps had faded upstairs long ago. Music hummed faintly from her room, the sound of a world that didn't need me anymore. I traced the rim of my glass with my finger, watching the reflection of that small flame tremble. It reminded me of myself, still burning, but barely holding on. I thought about all the years I spent giving, my time, my health, my peace, believing that one day love would come back to me the way I gave it. But love, I realized, doesn't always return home. Sometimes it just teaches you how to stay standing when no one says thank you. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was honest. For the first time, I heard myself breathe. It sounded strange, like the start of something new. I looked around the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the rain tapping against the window, the smell of chicken and butter fading into air, and I whispered, maybe this is where I start over. That night, I didn't sleep much, but when I finally lay down, the ache in my chest felt lighter. Not gone, just quieter. And somewhere between exhaustion and peace, I made a promise to myself. If my love was too much for one house, then I'd find a world big enough to hold it. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I didn't. Sunlight crept through the blinds, landing across the cold, empty dining table. The plate I never cleared still sat there, like a monument to every time I stayed quiet when I should have walked away. I made myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clear, almost cleansing. That's when it hit me. All my life, I'd taught my daughter how to take, but never how to give. And the person I needed to start giving to was me. So I dressed, combed my hair, and walked to the bank. The same bank where I'd been depositing part of my savings into her account for years. College fund, apartment fund, emergency fund. All the little ways a mother says, "I'll always catch you." The teller smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. How can I help you today?" I smiled back, steady, calm. "I'd like to close an account." It wasn't anger that guided me. It was something quieter, a kind of peace that comes after realizing you don't owe your pain to anyone's comfort. As the teller printed the final receipt, I thought of all the nights I stayed awake worrying if Samantha was eating well, if she was happy,
if I'd somehow failed her. But now, I understood. Loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself for them. When I stepped out of the bank, the air felt different, cooler, freer, like the world had finally opened a window just for me. I walked past the bakery her father used to love. The smell of fresh bread and butter filled the air. And for the first time in years, I bought myself a croissant. No reason, no guilt, just because I wanted to. The morning I left didn't feel like an ending. It felt like breathing again. A light mist hung over Portland as I rolled my suitcase through the quiet street. The air smelled of rain and beginnings. I didn't rush. Every step felt deliberate, like I was walking out of my old skin. At the airport, people hurried past me, business suits, crying children, lovers saying goodbye. But I was calm. For the first time in years, no one was waiting on me, and I wasn't waiting on anyone either. When the plane lifted off, I looked down through the window, the city shrinking beneath the clouds, the house I'd kept spotless for someone who never noticed, and I whispered, "Goodbye, Linda, who stayed." The sky opened into gold as we crossed above the clouds, and sunlight spilled through the window, washing over my hands. They were older now, lined, worn, but for the first time, I didn't see them as tired. I saw them as proof. Proof that I had built, fed, carried, and survived. Hours later, the plane touched down in Florence. The air was warm, sweet, with the scent of espresso and fresh bread. I stood outside the terminal, the sound of church bells echoing faintly across the city, and I smiled. There were no plans, no one waiting, just the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me that I was still here. I walked into the cobblestone streets, the suitcase bumping softly behind me, and thought of the note I left behind. She would find it soon. She would be angry, maybe even hurt. But one day, she'd understand. Because love doesn't die when you leave. Sometimes you leave because you love yourself, finally. And in that moment, under the Tuscan sky, I knew I hadn't escaped anything. I'd simply come home. To me. Florence felt like a painting come alive, cobblestone streets kissed by sunlight, air rich with coffee and history, and strangers who smiled like they'd known me all my life. For the first time in decades, no one called my name. No one asked where I was going or what I was making for dinner, and yet I had never felt more seen. Each morning, I'd walk to a small cafe near the river. The owner, Julia, always greeted me with a soft, "Buongiorno, signora." She didn't know my story, and she didn't need to. To her, I was simply Linda, a woman who liked her cappuccino with cinnamon and sat by the window sketching the world as it passed. I bought a small set of paints one afternoon. Cheap, messy, beautiful colors. I hadn't painted since college, but when the brush touched the canvas, it felt like my hands remembered what my heart had forgotten. I painted sunsets, rivers, the hands of old lovers sitting quietly on park benches. But mostly, I painted tables. Some empty, some full, some waiting for someone who would never return. Days turned into weeks, and I realized that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes slowly, like light through lace curtains, soft, persistent, and warm. I stopped checking my phone, stopped counting the days since she called. Instead, I started counting the moments that made me feel alive. The sound of church bells at noon, the laughter of children chasing pigeons in the square, the way the sky turned gold right before evening. I wasn't running anymore. I was arriving every single day. And sometimes when I sat by my open window at dusk, listening to the city breathe, I'd whisper to myself, "You were never meant to be small, Linda. You just forgot how big love could be when it included you."
It was a Sunday morning in Florence. Quiet, sunlit, peaceful. I was sitting by my window painting a vase of lilies, the kind my husband used to bring home every spring. Outside, church bells rang softly, their echoes carrying through the cobblestone streets like gentle reminders of grace. Then, my phone buzzed, a sound I hadn't heard in months. For a moment, I just stared at it, the screen glowing against the stillness of the room. Samantha. My heart stuttered. Her name felt like a wound and a wish all at once. The message was short. "Mom, are you okay? I tried to use the card and it didn't work. Are you still mad at me?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not because of what she said, but because after all this time, the first thing she asked about was the money. I set the phone down beside the window and looked out at the Arno River, the sunlight glittering like tiny pieces of forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. But then something inside me softened, not for her words, but for the girl she used to be, the one who once held my hand crossing the street, the one who called me her best friend. I didn't reply, not yet. I just whispered, "I'm okay, sweetheart. For the first time, I really am." And as I watched the light dance across the water, I realized sometimes silence says more than any message ever could. The sun was setting over Florence, spilling gold across the rooftops like a slow exhale. I stood by my balcony, watching the city shift from day to night, the bells echoing through the air, soft, forgiving, familiar. It had been 3 days since Samantha's message. I never replied, not because I was angry, but because I'd finally learned that not every door needs to be reopened just because someone knocks. I still thought about her, of course. A mother's heart doesn't stop loving. It just learns how to love without breaking. I wondered if she understood that closing her bank account wasn't revenge, it was a lesson in respect. That walking away wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I sat at my little wooden table, the one I bought from a flea market near Piazza Santo Spirito, and poured myself a cup of tea. Across from me, the empty chair caught the last of the sunlight, and for a moment I smiled, because I realized I wasn't waiting for her anymore. Not for an apology, not for understanding, just peace. I took out my notebook, the one I now filled with colors, not grocery lists, and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't letting someone back in. It's letting yourself move on, without bitterness, without blame." Outside, a couple walked by hand in hand, their laughter soft like music, and I thought, maybe love doesn't always return the way we expect. Maybe sometimes it returns as freedom, as quiet mornings, as the courage to start again. I closed the notebook and looked at the empty chair one last time. "I hope you're okay, sweetheart, because I finally am." And as the evening light faded into the warm hush of night, I understood the truest thing about love. It doesn't end when you walk away. It simply learns to live where it's valued. That's how peace begins, not in holding on, but in finally letting go, with love still in your hands.